There are 6 influences that we see as being significant in the next 5 to 10 years as it relates to the intellectual property marketplace. And I'm going to try to touch on each of these briefly. The first influence is probably one that you think the least about, but from a market development point of view, we think is critical, which is one of risk management. Managing a patent portfolio or an IP portfolio today has 3 building blocks. It's a 3-legged stool, it's a triangle, whatever analogy you want to use. But those 3 legs are first, strategy. Second, monetization. Most people get those. But third is risk management. There has to be that third component, or your program will not, in our view, be successful. So what risks are facing intellectual property owners in the marketplace generally today? I've prepared a list of what I consider the top 10. When David Letterman calls, I'll go through the whole list. But for today, I just wanted to make a point. You can group the top 10 risks into a few different categories. The first 4 are really related to judicial or policy risk. Numbers 5 and 6 are really corporate risk, depending upon how the large IP owners react. Number 7 is the shareholders, and 8, 9, and 10 relate to the market themselves. The conclusion I draw from this chart, if you accept that my 10 risks are reasonably accurate, is that it's out of the control of the patent department, because they only can deal with risk 5 and 6. Intellectual property risk management is now clearly first in the view of the policymakers, but it's also in the hands of the market itself. How well will Wall Street, how well will the rating agencies, how well will the valuation firms adapt to an emerging IP marketplace? Because if they blow it, then it's going to be a big detriment to the development of the market overall. And I point you to one example, which is number 10, which are public failures. Nortel, which is this huge public success, probably gets a whole lot more credit than it deserves. It was a very unusual transaction. A lot of things had to fall in place. It's an outlier to the indication of market development. But I don't think it's deniable that it had a huge positive effect on the market overall, as boards said, well, if Nortel is worth $4.5 billion, aren't we worth fill in the blank, some big number? And so it had this positive influence, which is a good thing. On the other hand, you can look at examples like Kodak, which is the opposite, where Kodak came forward and said that their portfolio was worth several billions of dollars, again, a la Nortel, and many in the industry just knew that wasn't the case. And as you look at what has happened since Kodak made those broad, bold predictions early, the stock has continued to decline. There was an ITC ruling again on Friday or Thursday afternoon that was adverse to Kodak, so we expect to see another sell-off when the market opens Monday. And the risk that I see is we can't, as professionals, refer to the Nortels and tell our marketplace that every deal is going to be the next Nortel, because it's not. And the worst thing that we can do is build false hope expectations, because when they're not met, then people are going to run to the door, especially the investment community. And then the other risk that is out there that lingers over everyone's head is the risk of the NPEs or patent trolls, and in particular the risk of royalty stacking. That large companies today see this line of NPEs out their door that's 10, 20, 50, or 100 plus long, and each of them are holding out their hand asking for quote-unquote a reasonable share. But if you add up those reasonable shares, it doesn't work. Not everyone can have 1/4%, 1/2%, or 1%, because the company only makes 15 or 20% profits. And yet, no one has really figured out how to address that risk. In my opinion, patent reform is not the answer, because patent reform may reduce the value of all patents, but let's say we take that line out the door and tell them all of their claims are now to be cut in half because of patent reform. The problem hasn't gone away, because their cumulative ask still exceeds the profitability of the business.